Welcome to the Space for It with Makayla and Jacob. We are two therapists working to navigate what it means to make space for what comes up as part of the human experience. And today, we are going to be talking about making space for anger.
Yes.
I'm curious, when we talk about anger, or when you talk about anger, Makayla, do any feelings or discomfort, or what comes up when you talk about anger?
A lot. I feel like initially it's like confusion at this point because as I'm thinking about it or talking about it, I'm like, what do we do with this emotion? How do we handle this emotion? And then because of the background of the what and the how and those questions is the experiences and the messaging that I've been given of like, that's not a safe emotion or it's not allowed. As a woman, you're not allowed to be angry. And so we're just not going to talk about it. We're just going to say no. And like you get in trouble if you express any sort of anger. So that's where it's like kind of two-part there. What about for you?
I've always had a very interesting relationship with anger in that I've seen a lot of people in my life get angry. Like there was an incident when I was a kid where I have two. I have well, one of them has passed away, but I had two grandpas, and both of them were very. I don't even know what word to put with this. Strong-willed, stubborn. If I am a stubborn person, it's very easy to see where I get it. But there was a time when I was a kid where it was the three of us, so me and both of them, out on a property building a fence. And they did not agree on how to do it. And it turned into a shouting match between the two of them in front of me. And I know that experience, that experience has come up multiple times in the years since it happened, because I know that kind of haunted both of them, that they had that interaction in front of me. But also I think that's indicative of how socially acceptable it is for men to get angry. But also how most of the time it's kind of unproductive. Like anger is, for men, it's like you can have anger, but don't do any of the other emotions because that would be weak and that would be bad and that would be unmanly. And yet anger so often just makes a mess. So those are a lot of the feelings that come up for me when I think about anger.
Well, what were those, like when you think about that memory, what is the emotion that shows up for you with that, being a kid seeing that?
I think for me it was very much like, this is silly. Like we're out here and you guys are fighting over how to build a fence. And that doesn't that doesn't make sense. I think now I would probably respond very differently than I did then. Because then how I responded was to not say anything and just be quiet and be off to the side. And I think now probably I would interject if that happened. A lot of what comes up now is also just kind of sad because I know that when you do something like that, when you have a fight and you never resolve it, that eats away at you.
It's interesting, and one of the reasons I asked that for your experience, because and that emotion that was felt in relation to the anger is because when you brought that memory up, for me the immediate thought was scary, that it's scary to see people yelling at each other, because that's how I've experienced anger. It's like when someone yells, that doesn't feel safe. So I wonder if there's a lot of different ways we interpret that, especially as kids, but then even as adults, if we don't have any modeling of how to handle anger, of what anger is there for, how to interpret it, so it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways.
That's interesting, because as you say that, I'm like, yeah, I wonder if I was scared then. And that doesn't stand out. That doesn't stand out as a primary thing that I felt, but also nothing really stands out as a primary thing that I felt during that, which honestly makes me think probably if I was going to label the stress response I had at the time, it was freeze.
Yeah.
If I was going to label my rank order of stress responses, I think my first would probably be fight now.
Mm.
But historically, I would say probably fawn and then freeze.
Mm.
Because I can usually make everybody happy. I can usually dissipate the situation by just reading what people want and then handing it to them.
Yeah. I learned a lot of that growing up too. Or that was the way which I wanted to bring that up too. That was kind of the way I reacted as well. And they're finding out more and more, and I think this is a really neat thing to find out and like share, is that in those moments we don't choose our stress response.
Mm-hmm.
We don't choose to fight or flight or freeze or fawn. Our body chooses that, our mind chooses that. And so like if for people who have been through really difficult things, traumas or assault, which is a trauma, but difficult things, like if you're frustrated or ashamed of how you reacted, I guess this maybe could be helpful to know that like you didn't choose that. That was what your body said at this moment in time. We think this has the is the way to keep us safe or survive. Not necessarily safe, but to survive. So I think that's kind of fascinating.
I am constantly bringing that up in therapy sessions.
Yeah.
We judge ourselves so often for how we respond in situations where it's like, oh, did you choose that? Was that a conscious choice? And the answer is no. It wasn't. Like you can, I would argue, and I don't know if there's research behind this, but I would argue you can teach yourself how to have a specific response through a massive amount of repetition. But for 99.99% of us, in pretty much every situation, we're not going to have done that. We're going to respond based on how our nervous system is like, hey, this is the most survivable response here. So I love that you brought that up.
And I love the way you said that too. Like we can teach ourselves, but I think a big part of that response is like that's when we're overwhelmed and full on in a stress response. Like we're reacting at that point. And so the way that we teach ourselves through that or to change that is to try and keep ourselves regulated in a zone. It's not meaning like completely calm and just fine, but in a zone where we can still engage like our prefrontal cortex and our logic and still like choose. We still have a response instead of we're just reacting. I think that's that space.
Here's what's so interesting about this conversation so far is that we didn't plan this first part of this, right? Like we're going to talk about anger and then we'll dive in. And almost immediately, we're both talking about self-protection. Like we're talking about how our brains and our bodies work together to make sure that we're safe. And anger is often a self-protective mechanism.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much shame around anger. Why do you think that is? Like, where does all of the the aura of shame that's usually associated with anger, where does that come from?
As you say that, it really, my mind moves straight to culture, to learned experience of it. Like we were both talking about the different ways we interpret or perceive anger growing up. All of us are going to have some sort of association with anger through that could be through parents or at school or other people, but in some way we're going to have experienced anger, and that's going to shape how we feel about it. So whether it feels unsafe, or we get punished for it, or get told that like ladies don't do that or girls don't talk like that. So I think a lot of the shame is learned. And in a way, it's a protective response as well, because if it's trying to point back in to say, okay, we can control this so that we're not rejected from this group, or so it can be trying to help us too.
I completely agree. And what's so interesting is that based on how we're talking about this so far, I think you and I have a similar cultural experience with this, where it's like anger is that, but also that's not universal, because there are so many different ways that it's approached, and in some places anger is just the norm. Like anger is not even taken seriously at all, because it's like, oh, this is just how we talk. This is how we interact when when we disagree, when there's tension, when whatever.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that is so fun as a therapist, but also very humbling, is like the eye-opening experience of realizing just how differently two people can interact with the same thing.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's really easy to assume, oh, I feel this way about anger. You're going to feel the same way. And it's always really fun. And I always think it's fun and funny and humbling and a lot of other things when I will assume that about a client and I'll say something to that effect and they'll be like, no, that's not right at all. For me,
Yeah.
it was this way. And I'll be like, oh, that is why you listen first and talk second.
Yeah. No, it is. It is. We all have such different experiences with it. One of the things I was reading lately was talking to or distinguishing like anger from associated behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And so anger is an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
The behaviors we often associate it with could be yelling, breaking
Mm-hmm.
things, physical aggression, violence, things like that. But those are behaviors. Like, while they may correspond or be connected in some way, anger is separate. Like, anger is the energy or the emotion that shows up. So just kind of even separating those, I think, was a really interesting way to look at it. Because a lot of people are scared of their anger. They're like, this doesn't feel safe for me to express, or I don't know what to do with it, and I don't want to do it in these ways because that has damaged relationships, or I've seen it. Like it hurts to receive.
When I was a kid and I got my first pocket knife, the idea that this was a tool and not a weapon was beaten into my head. Not literally, but like figuratively. I was reminded that repeatedly because I'm pretty sure my parents were like, we don't ever, ever, ever want to see you threaten somebody with a knife.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter how small it is. It's a tool, not a toy, not a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I would argue that anger is the same thing. Because anger can be, it can be an incredibly valuable tool to defend us quite literally, physically. It can be a tool to defend our worth. It can be a tool to validate that we have worth or that our experience is valid. And it can be a weapon. It can be a weapon that we use to attack or destroy or tear down, or like anger as an emotion is one of the I would argue it's one of the more visceral things that we experience emotionally. And it's one of the ones that we have to work hardest to figure out how to relate to in a way that doesn't leave us regretting what we did. Because it's very easy to get angry and then make decisions that we have to apologize for later. Or we don't maybe have to, but we might benefit from apologizing for later.
See, and that's, I feel like, one side of the spectrum. And the other side is stuffing it down and repressing it and not allowing it to be even like anger. What is anger? So there's, yeah. What do you think about that other side?
That is a really good point, and that I feel like that's probably the stereotypes of our genders coming out there. Because I'm naturally like, oh yeah, anger's a tool in my toolbox that I'm allowed to use. When you think about repressing anger, like where does it go for you?
When I try and feel that in my body, it's in my chest. Like, and throat. Like if I wanted to scream or I wanted to yell or I wanted to say something, it gets stuck sometimes, or pushing it down, it would live kind of right here, maybe even in my diaphragm a little bit. Yeah. And it mentally, like for me, it can turn to a sense of like helpless or hopeless and kind of depression, where it's like, I am not allowed to do anything about this. I feel a certain way about this, but what can I do? I'm not allowed to express it. Or if I do, I have all these other stereotypes that show up, or I get invalidated, or so a lot.
That is so contrary, or just the opposite of how I feel it and describe it, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense too. Because if anger is the visceral tool that you can use to make things happen and change things quickly, and you don't have access to it, then yeah, you don't have a whole lot of agency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're trying to hit in a hammer with your bare hand because you don't have a hammer, it's not going to work like it does if you have a hammer.
Mm-hmm. Or if you have a hammer, but you're not allowed to use it, and it just sits there. You're like, other people can use that hammer, but I'm not allowed to. So I have to sit here and hit it with my hand. Or just look at it and be frustrated or trip over it. That nail that I keep. Yeah.
So if you were going to try and educate somebody about what anger should be and what it should be used for, where would you start?
My first thought goes to emotions as energy and as information. So instead of using like terms of good and bad, right and wrong, things like that, just kind of going to, okay, what is this energy? Where is it in my body? Where does it show up? And what's it trying to tell me? Like, how can I use that energy in some sort of way? Or what does it need? So lately, anger has shown up a lot for many reasons. I have currently have a house being built next to me that blocks my sun in the winter, which I absolutely love having sun in the winter come stream through the windows, and I have a lot of plants that love it too. And so this sense of like injustice shows up, this anger shows up, that's like, I don't feel like I was considered or thought of or cared about when someone else chose these other things. So that's one way it shows up. And one of the ways I'm trying not to like repress or stuff my anger down anymore, but also not let it just be reactive, and comes in relationship with my partner, being able to share just how I feel, like that I am angry. Even just saying that for me has been helpful, like that this sucks, that I wish I could change it, I wish I could do something about it, and giving a voice to that energy and to that. And part of that is sadness. So it's like anger is partially there as this injustice, but it's also secondary to this, like, it shows up in that way too, as secondary to like grief, that I lost that sunlight that comes in. So it's a little bit of both, but being able to give it that language and the words is one way that has been helpful in just like allowing it. And interpreting it. I mean, in the interpretation, I really care about that. That's something I really enjoy. And it is taken away from me. Someone else chose something that didn't have me in mind, and that sucks. I really value being considerate of other people, and that wasn't the case in this scenario. So kind of interpreting that of like, oh, it makes sense that this showed up for me because of all these reasons. That's the first stuff that comes to mind for me. What comes up for you?
Listening to that, what I noticed is that it very much, like, anger is very much playing the role there of kind of defending how you feel, of showing up when it's like, no, there's an injustice happening here. There's something that I value that I'm losing. It's really hard to sit with loss. It's hard to sit with anything that takes away or hurts or causes us to feel any of the softer or more vulnerable emotions like sadness, pain, fear, hurt. And anger is really quick to step in there and be like, yeah, this isn't right.
Yeah.
When I think about anger, often the first thing that comes to mind is frustration, because things Like for me, it's like things are not happening the way that I want them to, or the way that I think is right, or the way that I think they should. And that is frustrating. And anger feels like the most tangible thing to do with that. I think it's really tricky because anger is also an emotion that, because we associate it with a lot of aggressive behaviors like yelling and hitting and like being violent, people don't as much take anger itself as seriously. Which is also, I think, a big part of white supremacy and in racism, in the idea that it's like, oh, I'll listen to you when you're not shouting at me anymore. Because I'm not going to take you seriously if you're angry. I'm only going to take you seriously if you are stoic and in control, which is a whole different, other really problematic viewpoint, because it's very invalidating, and it doesn't allow for the reality that it's okay to be angry. And it's okay to express that in a way that demonstrates that you're really angry. But also, that doesn't mean it's okay to just... I'm looking for the right words for how to say what I'm trying to say. Because I want to validate that it's good to be angry, and you're allowed to be angry. And it's always important to think about, what am I doing with the anger, and how am I expressing it? Am I expressing it in a way that's unjustly hurting others? Or am I expressing it in a way that is actually communicating or accomplishing what I want to be accomplishing? It's like, let's say the thing in my life right now that most quickly draws out my frustration and then anger is my children. Because when they are not listening, a great example. Yesterday we were at the beach. It was me and 3 of my kids, my 3 oldest kids. And we had a ton of fun. And it was that magical thing where it's like, they're all playing together. I have a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and then a 1-year-old. And they were all playing together like magically well. It was one of those kind of shocking moments where I spent like 20 minutes just sitting there watching, like, what is happening right now? This is great. And we had a ton of fun, and the whole experience was amazing. And then I said it was going to be time to go. And I was like, we're going to go in 5 minutes. And then in 5 minutes, I said, it's time to go. And my 2 older kids, who I can't just pick up and carry off the beach like I do with the 1-year-old, my 2 older kids took off in the opposite direction.
Oh my God.
They were like, we're not leaving. And instantly I'm flooded. Instantly I'm like, get over here. Like, that's in my mind. I'm like, this went so well. And suddenly now I'm crashing and burning. And there are so many different things that I could do with that. And arguably yesterday I did not handle this well, because I didn't shout at them. I didn't chase after them, because I'm also holding a child and all of our beach stuff. I sat there for a minute and was like, oh my goodness, and just felt it. And then in my mind, the 2 courses that I had, which I'm sure there is another better course that now I'm like, I should have done the 3rd option. But in my mind, the 2 courses I had were either shout at them or just start walking towards the car. And that's the one I went with, because I'm like, I'm not going to actually leave them at the beach. I'm not actually going to get out of sight from them. But I am going to start walking. And sure enough, like, I start walking away. They follow from a great distance, but they still followed. And like, I had this seething in my heart of like, we had so much fun, and I want this whole experience to be fun, but also we have to go. Like, it's time to leave. We have to go home because nap time is approaching. Like, we got to the car. I wish I could say the story was over, but it's not. We got to the car. They got to the car too. And at this point, everybody's hungry. We're all hot. We're all sandy. We're all in various states of like approaching hangry and uncomfortable.
Oh gosh. Recipe for disaster.
I'm putting everything in the car, and I'm trying to get a reasonable amount of the sand off of them before I put them in the car. And then one of them is running back and forth on the sidewalk. And we're next to a busy street. Like, this is the, like, where I live, there is what's called the barrier island. And so there's basically just one main street, and on one side are condo buildings and houses, and then the beach, like just one row of them, and then the other side is more. But it's like, this is the road that everybody who's on here drives down. So it's fairly busy. So in my mind, I'm picturing my child tripping, falling into the street, and getting run over, which is unpleasant and undesirable and makes me like nervous a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I'm also coming off of having them not listen to me coming off the beach. And one of my kids is running back and forth. And I'm like, you need to stop. And they didn't stop. And I said, you need to stop. And they didn't stop. And then finally, I was like, if you don't stop and stand here right now, you can't have iPad time today. Which I have so many strong feelings about how parents should not use threats to control their children. And also I do it because I'm very human. And sometimes I'm like, it feels like the only way I can get something to change. But what was very funny about this, funny, humiliating, both of those things, was that I said that, and I said it very assertively. And 3 seconds later, a large group of college students walked by, where it was like, they all heard me. They all knew. And it was just like, this was humbling. That's such a good example, though, of how, like, I was angry because I was not being listened to. Yes, by the time we're by the car, I'm concerned about their safety. But before that, I'm not concerned about their safety. Like, we're fine. We're on the beach. There's no cars. It was a situation where what I should have done was tried to slow down and actually connect with them and go, like, what you're supposed to do in that situation, if you have your wits about you and you're regulated and all the things, is you're supposed to, like, go to where they are, connect with them, figure out what they need to leave. That does not always feel realistic. I don't always have the patience for that. Like, various excuses I can make up as to why that didn't happen. But also, when we just shout, when we're just aggressive, when we get angry, when we, like, all of those things, what that does is that's not respecting who they are. Like, that doesn't respect who my kids are as people. And it takes away their ability to make decisions. Because it's kind of like, you have to do what I want. Otherwise, I will aggressively tell you to do what I want, and then you'll definitely have to do it. All of this is very fresh because this all happened yesterday. But also, this happens over and over and over again, where something will happen and something with my kids will happen, and I will feel it bubbling up. And sometimes I respond well, and sometimes I don't. And when I don't, I think 90% of the time, I figure it out and apologize. And then I think 10% of the time, by the time I've figured it out, I've, like, they're in bed and we've moved on, and I forget to apologize. I'm very human and don't always express my anger in a way that I think is productive and unhurtful.
I think that's valid. And again, it can get, when we get into that overwhelmed, unregulated state, we're more likely to be there. And then as a parent, like, being low on sleep or stressed for a handful of different reasons, or when you said, like, when the safety did become a factor, I can see the fear there driving some anger to try and change the situation or protect them. There's a lot of things, and we are human. We're not always going to get it right. One of the things too is that when we do that, though, I don't know who said this, but it says it's not what you do, but what you do after what you have done. So it's talking about that repair, about the apology, about reflecting on what was going on for you and your experience, and repairing, and being able to even say, like, hey, yeah, like, anger did show up for me, and normal, like, it's fine, that's an emotion that is there, and how I handled it, I would have liked to have done differently or something. So we're not, like, making anger the bad guy and saying it's not allowed or it's always bad, but kind of having an and there. We're like, yep, that showed up for me, and these are the reasons why, and I would have liked to have done it differently because I can see how that was for you. Like, I care about your experience, like you were saying, respecting them as people, caring about their experiencing of things and wanting to validate and acknowledge that is really important. And I think that's a lot of times what doesn't happen is a lot of times we just move on. And I know how I have heard it a lot, as well as for myself, but when people just move on and don't say anything, and you'll hear this phrase maybe from friends or family or something, it's like, and they acted like nothing had happened.
Oh, yeah.
That phrase, I'm like, yeah, because it never got repaired. It never got resolved. That loop, that emotion where it went up and around, like maybe the emotional experience in your body slightly did, but the mental understanding of it didn't get wrapped up and resolved. And that's important if you want to have a positive, healthy relationship with someone, is that repair and resolution. I also, when you were saying frustrated, one of the things that someone brought up to me is like, whenever you hear the word frustrated, there's an expectation behind that. And I think that's so interesting because we can't necessarily like change our emotional experience. Emotions kind of come and go just like thoughts. They show up and they're not completely in our control. We can influence them, things like that. But things like expectations, we have a little more control over. If we're aware of like, oh, what is my expectation here, or what was my expectation there, that can help us regulate sometimes that frustration. I don't know. What do you think about that?
What's funny about that, because absolutely, frustration is the result of expectation not being met. And if I look at yesterday, the reason my kids didn't want to leave the beach is because they were having a great time at the beach. It's so sad that my response to them not wanting to leave because they're having a great time is frustration and then anger. Because it's like, come on, dude, like chill out. It's fine. And I think it's really hard when you try and set an expectation. Because I told them, I'm like, I'm prepping you. We are going to leave. Okay, it's about to be time. Okay, it's time. And logically, when you have a fully formed prefrontal cortex and you are an adult, that all leads up to a point where you have accurate expectations for what's going to happen and you ideally respond accordingly. But kids don't have that. And therefore we end up in all of these situations where we as adults will have these expectations and then they don't get met. I'm perpetually preaching mindfulness because mindfulness is one of the primary tools that we can use to catch ourselves when we're experiencing those heightened emotions. And it allows us to actually choose our response to the emotion. Because an emotion is a reaction. And then what we do after that, that's our response to that. Because we don't get to choose how our system reacts to what happens. But when we're aware of what's going on, and when we notice like, oh, I'm feeling the tension and everything is tight, or like whatever it is for you, when you notice that that's happening, then you can decide, do I want to take a deep breath here before I respond? Do I want to do something to handle this, like this intensity, before I express it in that way?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I've been working really, really hard to do with my kids. And my goodness, I'm so grateful that you don't have to get it right every time. Because you can't. I can't. Like none of us can. But like something that I don't remember ever happening when I was a kid is I don't think I ever remember having an adult sit down and be like, hey, let's talk through what you're feeling. Like, wow, you seem like you're experiencing a lot of frustration, or you like it seems like you're really angry right now, or even like sad or hurt. I don't remember those conversations. And we know now that those are the conversations that teach kids what their emotions are and ways that they can respond to them.
I think that experience is super common for a lot of us as a millennial, beyond some of the newer generations still, but are kind of getting better around that. But like emotional healthy emotional modeling or information was not readily like available or widely spread. Yeah.
Well, it's easier, it's so much easier to parent with aggression.
Mm.
Because if your kids are afraid of you, they'll do whatever you want them to. And that's not healthy. But that's how most of us were raised. And that's how a lot of our parents look at young kids and are like, well, that's how you should raise them, because then they won't do stuff that you don't want them to. Then they won't do things that are destructive. And that's the rationale that often gets used, is that it's like, well, if you can control them, then they won't get hurt. Mm. And I'm like, well, if the way that you're controlling is hurting them, isn't that counterproductive? Like, isn't that accomplishing the opposite of what you are intending to set out to do?
Yeah.
But also it is so much more work to be like, we're going to slow down here. We're going to talk about the frustration. Like, I'm not going to attack you for the fact that your prefrontal cortex is not developed enough that you couldn't contain that explosive reaction. Mm. Sure, there will be consequences, but like, I'm not going to attack you for it.
And I feel like that is helpful in a handful of ways, like, but to keep them or help them emotionally regulate, like, and not repress or react, but kind of, again, modeling, like, that this is acceptable, that you have this emotion, and I'm here. It's not disconnecting us. I'm not going to send you to a corner to, like, be on your own or feel isolated or rejected. And, like, these are ways that are okay and acceptable, and these are ways that are not. Like, we're not slamming doors. We're not calling each other names. Like, these are things we're not going to do. These are things that we are. And if we do slam doors or call each other names, this is how we repair. So, like, modeling those things. One of the other things that I remember and that a colleague just reminded me of recently was kind of I can only remember 3, and I think there might only be 3, but there's 3 S's of, like, what we can do with anger. And so it's like, we can stuff it, we can repress it, shove it down, we can spew it, which would be those acts of yelling, throwing things, breaking things, hitting, aggression or violence, or we can study it. And so that third one is where that mindfulness piece comes in. It's like, what does this feel like in my body? What values is this hitting on, or what expectations do I have here that aren't being met? Is there a need not being met? Like, what, getting curious is one of the best ways to help yourself stay regulated. And before you get there, because if you're in anger pretty fully, you may not have that, like, regulation, or, like, we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, that logic or reasoning to be able to, like, start being curious. So one thing that could be helpful is, like, okay, I'm going to take a time out. Like, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to do something else for 5 minutes. I'm going to fold laundry. I don't know, whatever, like, whatever you have available to you, until you can get back into somewhat of a regulated state where you can be curious and start asking those questions or reflecting.
I think that's why practicing something like mindfulness repeatedly is so important, which does not have to be an extensive thing. It can be as simple as just checking in and taking 30 seconds every now and again and being like, ooh, deep breath. Okay, where am I feeling tension? Where am I feeling tightness? Where am I feeling aching? Where am I feeling, fill in the blank? Like, just take inventory, do a body scan. Because if you haven't done that when things are okay, you're not going to do it when you're dysregulated.
Yeah.
And if you want to have a tool available to you when you're dysregulated, or when the situation can get you dysregulated, you need to be so familiar with using it that it's just second nature. Like, that's the classic thing with first responders, where it's like, they don't just, like, firefighters don't just load up on the truck when there's a fire. They load up on the truck before there's a fire, over and over and over and over again, so that when there's a fire, they don't have to be like, okay, what do we have to bring, hoses? Like, what? It's all just there. I
like to think of it as, this might be an older reference. I have two. So I can catch either maybe. One of them is like Mr. Miyagiing things, where you're like doing the same thing over and over, and you're like, I don't really know why I'm doing this. I don't really need this right now. And then when you're in action, that action is the one that you need, and it just comes naturally because you've already done it over and over. So kind of like you're saying. The other metaphor I like to use that can be helpful if you don't know who, get the Mr. Miyagi reference.
Wax on, wax off.
Yeah. The other one I like to think about is like if you are riding a bike or rollerblading or scootering or something like that, and you have a hill coming up, would it be better to just like stop at the bottom of the hill and then try and go up it? Or would it be better to like get some momentum and then help yourself get up it? And that repetition is that momentum. You're starting to pedal and be able to have some energy going in, so that you're probably not going to get all the way to the top on that energy, especially if it comes when you've just started practicing. But over time, the more you practice, because we all have hills and valleys, and we're all like, that's coming at some point. Who knows what it looks like exactly. But yeah, can we start practicing? Can we start pedaling so that when that happens, we have some help, and then we can learn from that?
Like when we're perpetually in a state of anger, which I think it's very easy to end up there, particularly if you don't practice doing something with it that's not just acting out aggressively, but that's actually like, okay, I'm experiencing anger. What's beneath this? Like, what's driving me to feel the need to protect or attack? If we aren't doing that, it's easy to end up chronically angry, which has a lot of negative impacts on our physical health and also on our relationships and just our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
Right now, and this will not land with everybody because we live in a very polarizing moment, but right now there is so much injustice happening in the world. Like there are so many people who are seemingly unnecessarily being caused intense pain or being forced to deal with extensive loss. And there's so much injustice around all of it that it's hard. I think it's hard to look at it and be like, this is fine. Like I look at it and I'm like, no, I'm angry about all of this happening. But the scope of it is so broad that it's hard not to end up helpless, like feeling just like a sense of learned helplessness, because like it's awful. I hate it. It's unjust. I'm angry about it, and there's nothing I can do. And at some point, that burns me out. And I think that's the other reason it's so important to always be exploring, like, why does this anger matter? Like the anger matters because, in my opinion, the anger matters because it's representative of caring, like of caring about justice, of caring about equity, and of caring beyond just the scope of my own life. And it's really sad what's happening.
Yeah, I hear in that like compassion and love and caring all come together of like, yeah, I want to protect people from this suffering or stop the perpetrators of it. Yeah. So in that, just to kind of give our listeners some ideas of like, so what do we do? Like, how do we've talked about like trying to study it, reflect on it, interpret it, or understand like the information. And we have this physical energy and reaction in our body. And then we have the mental side of it. So what are some healthy ways that we can release that physical energy and use the information from the emotion to like act, or how do we release that or express it?
One of the go-to ways that I have, like, it's become my go-to way for dealing with a lot of the stress that comes from all of the dysregulation is exercise. Because like I had a professor who talked about this in college, but they were like, you can either sweat it out, or you can cry it out. And there was a study on tears and how tiers lower the body's level of cortisol. But also, if you actually read the study, it's not a foolproof study. Like, it's like, yes, they took a bunch of women and had, like, they measured the cortisol in their blood levels, and then they had them watch something and cry, and then they, like, took another sample and measured it again, and the level of cortisol went down. And so from that, they deduced or decided that the crying was causal towards the cortisol going down. And it's like, well, there are holes in that. It could have been several things. But either way, it seems like your options are, if you have a lot of cortisol and you want to get it out, you can either cry it out or sweat it out. That was the point of all that. I have found it really productive in the last several months to lean into, like, when I'm really stressed, I'm going to do something. I'm going to get my heart rate up high, and I'm going to keep it there for a bit. And I can feel that changing how I feel. Like, if I start a run really stressed and I push hard, by the time I'm done, I'm like, okay, there's a perspective shift here.
Yeah.
I'm still not happy with how things are, but I feel differently.
I love the sigh. And that is huge in our body's system. Like, that is kind of one of the signals that it's like the threat has. And again, our mind is, if you've listened to our past ones, in these examples, we're talking about anger getting our nervous system out of whack. That's because we're responding to a perceived threat or a physical real threat, and our mind doesn't really distinguish between the two. It reacts the same either way. So that sigh is that parasympathetic nervous system coming back online and saying, we escaped, or we fought our way through it, but, like, the threat is over for the most part, at least within our body. So I love that you did that. And exercise is a good way, like, because we do have that physical energy. If it's flight that our bodies naturally tend towards, it's trying to get us to run away from this threat. So physically, all that muscle tension needs to be released in some way. If it's fight, a lot of times it'll be in our fists, even in our eyes, or our jaw, or things that way. So even getting the physical exercise can allow us to release that too. Maybe in our arms. So exercise is one great way. I also love, like, stretching or shaking or dancing. Kind of like, if you've ever seen your dog or a horse or a cat or something get into some kind of a fight or some kind of thing that was, like, weird, after that, most 99% of the time, they'll shake it out and be like, that's one of the ways that the body is like, okay, back to normal. We shake out that tension, that energy, and reconnect with that parasympathetic nervous system to bring us back down. Walking can do that. Again, it's exercise, but it's kind of rhythmic in that same way. Can get us to regulate and get that bilateral stimulation going. So, yeah, there's a couple ways there.
I think one of the other ones, because movement is not accessible to everyone. One of the other things that makes a big difference is talking to somebody. Which, this is a not so shameless plug for therapy. You should try it, it's amazing. But also, it doesn't have to be a therapist. Like, one of the more systemic things that I sometimes talk about is how, if we were better at friendship, we wouldn't need 99% of therapists. Because you can disagree with me on this if you want, but I think that if people were better at friendship, like, if people were more willing to be friends in a way where it's like they listen and support and are invested in care, a lot of what people come to therapy to deal with, they would deal with outside of therapy in relationship. Like if you look at PTSD, one of the reasons PTSD gets developed is because people don't have space to process through what they've experienced with people who either have a similar experience or who will, like, validate and support them in working through it. which is why in places where everybody has the same traumatic experience, the rates of PTSD are way lower. Because it's not taboo to talk about it. It's not taboo to be engaged with others about this shared experience. I don't actually ever think it'll happen.
Yeah.
But the idealist in me is like, it would be cool if it did. Like, I would love if therapists became largely unnecessary.
Yeah. I've often said, like, my goal is to put myself out of business. And I don't think that will necessarily ever happen unless we do start getting better, like, global education around parenting, around communication, around healthy relationships, around interpretation and expression of emotions, which we're kind of headed that direction in some ways.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I hear it, and I yes, and there's a measles outbreak right now.
Yeah, so we're stepping
which is
back
proof
in a few ways too.
that is proof that our jobs will always exist, because it doesn't matter how concrete scientific information is. It does not matter how concrete there's evidence that, like,
Yep.
this saves lives. People will still choose not to honor it. People will still choose to be like, no, we disagree. We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Thereby limiting job security, which I know is probably kind of insensitive thing to say, but it's real.
But I think it's kind of cool in a way too, because it's like, I don't know, it's like my sister reminded me, because I would get really bummed at all of the horrific things in the world. But then she reminded me of that quote, like, look for the helpers. And it's like, there will always be horrific things in the world. I mean, that's part of being human and living. I mean, we could full stop. And there will always be people wanting to help and trying to support each other and bring community or help people develop skills to move in their next direction that matters to them, that they didn't have because of this. And so it's like, yeah, it is nice to feel like there's some job security. Of course, who doesn't want that? And it's like, but that's awesome in a way too, because there will always be people who want to help. But okay, so we talked about, like, last couple minutes, but we talked about some of the physical ways we can maybe dissipate that energy or stress response. What do we do to mentally work through that? What are some ways we can mentally work through anger?
I think it's important, and this has helped my mindfulness, but I think it's important to not over-intellectualize it. Because it's easy to intellectualize all of our emotions and basically think through them in a way that's very pragmatic and being like, yes, I'm angry right now because X person did Y thing, which made me feel Z emotion. And, like, to kind of catalog our feelings in that way versus, and this is the more, like, postmodern and somatic therapist in me coming out. That's like, let yourself be present with it. Like, if you're feeling a lot of anger, sit with the anger for a minute and just be like, okay, where am I feeling this in my body? And what is the feeling actually like? Like, not just tension, but, like, is it heaviness? Is it pain? Is it sadness? Is it some ache that's there? And allow yourself to follow it. Because if we follow our emotions, which I know sounds very strange to say if it's not something you're familiar with, if you follow an emotion, it'll take you somewhere. Like, your emotions exist to communicate something important to you. And we've gotten in such a habit of muting or suppressing or ignoring them that we've lost some of the practice of being able to be like, no, like, there's something there. The fear people often have there with anger in particular is that they're like, if I feel my anger, I'm just going to get more angry. And that's where, like, the follow-up step is that hold the feeling and validate it. Because odds are, if your anger is rooted in something that's protective or aggressive, it's trying to do a good thing. It's trying to keep you alive. It's trying to keep somebody else alive. It's trying to, Like there's some valuable thing that it's trying to do, and you can validate that. You can validate that without destroying anything or without giving in to have this aggressive or violent response to the anger.
To give an example of what that might sound like, because sometimes we use these words and it can be like, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I validate it? So what comes to mind for me is being like, it makes so much sense that I feel this way. Like, it makes so much sense that this anger is here right now, is one way you could validate it. And that's not saying, like, I'm right, he's wrong, or she's wrong, or they're wrong, or anything that way, but just acknowledging and, like, labeling the emotion and validating it through language of, like, yeah, it makes sense that it's here right now. Even if I can't understand it completely yet, I'm sure it makes sense that it's here. So that's one way you could do that.
One of the things that came to mind as you were saying that is that our emotions are values neutral. Like, you having your emotion is not wrong. The emotion itself is not wrong. What might get you in trouble is what you decide to do with it. And that's a really key piece of allowing yourself to feel, is that you have to not judge what comes up. You have to be curious. You have to explore it and accept it. And just because you're feeling something that makes you want to destroy things does not mean you have to destroy things.
And it doesn't mean that you should ignore it or try and get rid of it or stuff it down and not let it be there either. Yeah. But it's like, okay, can we pause and do something different? If my response normally is to act out, throw things, yell, or if my response is to stuff it down, distract, I don't even know, people please, can I just pause? Like, when this shows up, can I first just pause and take maybe a couple deep breaths, so that I create a little bit of space to try doing something different.
One of the things that I try really hard to do with my kids, as I'm trying to teach them how to handle their emotions or respond to their emotions in a way that I would label as effective, because lots of potential definitions there. But one of the big things I'm always trying to do is, first, when I catch things escalating, I tune into myself and I'm like, okay, take a breath. You're the adult here. Like, it's your job to not lose your mind and make this much worse. So take a breath. And then I'm always trying to bring out the emotion. I'm trying to, like, not just evoke it by being like, ooh, tell me what's going on, but I'm trying to actually label it. Like, ooh, you seem like you're experiencing a lot of frustration, or you seem really sad, or you seem really hurt or angry, or whatever it is. Trying to label it and then give space for it, because I want my kids to know that there is no emotion that's too big. There's no emotion that's too aggressive. There's no emotion that's unsafe to be here. I want you to feel okay bringing anything that you feel to the table, because there's space for it here. And I'm not perfect. It does not always go perfectly. But also, over time and repetition, it makes a huge difference. And you can see it, like, it's really cool actually to watch with kids, because you can see how they're, like, the wheels are turning and they're figuring out, oh, this is how this works and how to apply things and cause and effect. Like, it's fun, and I enjoy that.
I think, I mean, this might need to go into another episode, or maybe not. Maybe not. But there's at least a basis, I guess, I think, in understanding, like, anger as an emotion, as energy, as something to interpret, it's information. And then some of the ways that you can dissipate some of that physical experience of it, and maybe some of the ways that mentally you can do that. Again, pausing. Body scan, you mentioned, journaling, reflecting on it, like, what values did it hit, or how was it trying to protect me, or and then the other two, I think the main two that we didn't hit on so much, we briefly covered, were, like, communication, like, how do we communicate about anger, and boundaries. So that might be a whole nother episode, really. Because those are pretty big topics. I feel like boundaries is and communication, and they kind of go hand in hand.
Hearing that, I think one other thing I'll say is if somebody is angry, if somebody's expressing anger towards you, it's really important to be curious. Like if you want their anger to, if you want them to feel heard in their anger, which I know is probably a weird sounding statement, but if you want somebody to feel heard in their anger, you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to be curious and not just turn off because they sound angry. And so if you're in a situation where you are unsafe, by all means, remove yourself from the situation. This is the internet, and I just feel the need to say that. But in a situation where it's like, if your partner comes to you and they're expressing some anger and you're like, whoa, this does not make sense. Be curious, because there's probably a reason it does make sense. There's some unmet need. There's some injustice. There's something that's happening that makes it make sense. And if we can hear that, and often if we can validate it or meet the need or whatever it is, it can be very healing.
And I think a common reaction, again, like with our base reactions that we learned about anger from childhood, can be that defensiveness, because for a lot of us, it will be perceived as unsafe. So we may need to do a little work there before we're able to sit and hold someone else's anger, potentially. So if that's your experience, notice that too. Being like, yeah, this doesn't feel okay. I don't feel like I can be here right now. Or like, can we get curious about that? Like, where does that come from? Or what memory is linked to that, And that's a lot of stuff you can do with a counselor too. It can be helpful because they can guide that discovery, or like, yeah, tell me more about this experience. Or, yeah. If you're still here, thank you for listening this far. I hope this has been helpful, because I know this is a topic that comes up a lot for us as counselors, but also, I mean, in my own life, it sounds like in yours too, in our culture, I'll say. So thank you for being here. Let us know other things that come up for you as you listen, or that you want us to talk more about. I think we will probably do another episode on boundaries and communication, kind of related to anger. But yeah, thanks so much for being here. Anything else, Jacob?
I don't think so. I think that is everything.
Awesome.
As always, we appreciate you all. And whatever time of day it is, wherever you are, have a lovely rest of your day.
Yes. See you next time.